Imagine a land so vast and so ancient that the rest of the world's geography feels like a footnote by comparison. A continent where the desert glows red at sunrise, where rainforests older than the Amazon press against coral reefs that stretch beyond the horizon, where cities of extraordinary beauty sit on harbors that the ocean spent millions of years designing, and where the wildlife moves through the landscape with the ease of animals who were here long before anyone else arrived. Australia is not just a destination, it is a reckoning with scale, with distances that defeat ordinary maps, with a natural world so unlike anything elsewhere that the first scientists to receive specimens of its animals suspected they were being deceived, with an indigenous culture 65,000 years deep that is the oldest continuous human civilization on Earth. Every part of this country offers something that cannot be found anywhere else on Earth. This is not just travel. This is discovery. This is wonder. This is your journey through the unforgettable beauty of Australia. Sydney. Our journey begins in Sydney, a city that nature assembled over millions of years and that has had the grace not to ruin. The harbor is the foundation of everything here. Its deep blue water stretching through headlands and coves and hidden beaches in a geography so generous that the city built around it feels like an appropriate response to what was already there. The Opera House sits at Bennelong Point, where the harbor narrows, its white shell-like forms rising from the water on a platform of sandstone stairs. Its surfaces of over 1 million ceramic tiles changing color through the day, from bone white at noon to warm gold in the late afternoon. From the water, arriving by ferry with the harbor bridge arching overhead, it is simply one of the great sights of the world. Bondi Beach lies 6 kilometers from the city center, a crescent of yellow sand where the surf is managed by lifeguards who have been watching this beach for over a century. The coastal walk south from Bondi to Coogee follows the sandstone cliff line through a sequence of ocean pools and headland views that deliver, at every turn, the particular quality of Sydney light. Clear, direct, the kind of light that makes color more vivid than it has any right to be. Great Barrier Reef. Off the coast of Queensland, stretching for 2,300 kilometers along the eastern edge of the continental shelf, lies the largest living structure ever built by any organism on this planet. The Great Barrier Reef consists of approximately 9,000 individual coral reefs assembled over 20,000 years. It is visible from space. It contains more species of marine life than the entire Atlantic Ocean. To enter the water above the reef for the first time, to put your face beneath the surface and open your eyes, is to move from one world into another entirely. Below the surface, the reef spreads in every direction in colors and shapes and densities of life that the word beautiful is not large enough to contain. Plate corals the diameter of dining tables. Staghorn corals branching upward in formations of orange and purple. A turtle cruising the wall of the reef with the unhurried authority of an animal that has been navigating these waters for 100 million years. The outer reef offers walls of coral descending vertically into darkness. the visibility extending 30 meters or more on calm days. Reef sharks patrol the wall, manta rays cruise the cleaning stations. The whale sharks that pass through the Coral Sea seasonally move through this water with a gentleness entirely at odds with their scale. Daintree rainforest. North of Cairns, where the road narrows and the canopy closes overhead, and the sound of the highway disappears behind the density of vegetation on both sides, the Daintree rainforest begins. This is the oldest continuously surviving tropical rainforest on Earth, predating the Amazon by 60 million years, covering the coastal ranges of far north Queensland in a density of plant life that produces, in the middle of the day, a twilight at ground level. Walking the forest trails in the early morning, when the mist sits in the upper canopy and the forest sounds are at their most varied, is to move through evolutionary time in the most literal sense available. The plants on both sides of the path belong to lineages that were already ancient when the dinosaurs were young. The Daintree River flows through the forest to the coast, its brown water slow and mangrove-lined, the crocodiles on the banks motionless in the afternoon heat. Where the forest meets the Coral Sea at Cape Tribulation, two World Heritage areas converge in the same frame. The reef visible offshore, the rainforest reaching the beach on the landward side. It is one of the most extraordinary natural juxtapositions in Australia. Two of the oldest and richest ecosystems on Earth sharing a coastline. Whitsunday Islands. In the heart of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, 74 islands rise from water of a color that the word turquoise was invented to describe and still does not quite capture. The Whitsunday Islands are the most beautiful island group in Australia. Their slopes of dry forest descending to beaches of silica sand, so fine it remains cool underfoot even in the midday heat. Whitehaven Beach stretches for 7 kilometers along the eastern coast of Whitsunday Island. Its sand of 98% pure silica, its water the particular shade of blue that the Coral Sea produces when the depth is right and the light is overhead. From the Hill Inlet lookout at the northern end, the swirling patterns of sand and water in the tidal inlet below photograph as abstract art. The white and the blue mixing in the tidal movement into patterns that change with every tide and are never the same twice. The sailing routes between the Whitsunday Islands, the channel between the island groups, the anchorages in the protected bays, are among the finest sailing waters in the world. The anchor dropping in a bay of such stillness and clarity that the seafloor is visible 6 meters below. Melbourne. Melbourne presents itself differently from Sydney, more quietly, more gradually, with the confidence of a city that does not need the harbor to make its case. It is a city of laneways and galleries, of coffee taken seriously, of 4 seasons in a single day delivered without apology, of a cultural life so dense and so diverse that visitors who arrive planning 3 days routinely find themselves rescheduling the flight home. The laneways of the CBD are where Melbourne reveals its most distinctive character. Hosier Lane, its walls covered in continuously rotating street art of a quality that any gallery would not be embarrassed to show. De Grave Street, its espresso bars operating at full capacity through the morning with a seriousness that the Melbourne coffee culture demands and that the rest of Australia has spent 20 years trying to replicate. The Royal Botanic Gardens extend south of the city along the Yarra River in one of the finest urban green spaces in Australia. Their plant collections arrange through a landscape of lawns and lakes, and the particular Melbourne light that arrives between the clouds on an afternoon of variable weather and turns everything it touches briefly and completely gold. Great Ocean Road. Southwest of Melbourne, the Great Ocean Road follows the Victorian coastline for 243 kilometers through a landscape of cliff and surf and ancient forests that is one of the great scenic drives in the world. The road was carved into the cliff face above the Southern Ocean. Dramatic, cold-lit, enormous in scale. The sea below it genuinely powerful and genuinely indifferent. The 12 Apostles are the most famous feature of the road. Limestone stacks rising from the surf at Port Campbell, their bases continuously undercut by the waves, their tops flat against the turbulent white below. At sunrise, when the first light catches their eastern faces, and the sea around their bases is moving in white, and the sky above them is still half dark, it is one of the great natural sights of southern Australia. The ocean at its most theatrical, the rock at its most sculptural. The Great Otway National Park covers the ranges above the coast road in temperate rainforest of Myrtle Beach and Mountain Ash. Its canopy walkway allowing movement through the treetops at height, the fern gully below it in perpetual green shade, the waterfalls of the Eyre River descending through the ranges toward the sea. Tasmania. Fly south from Melbourne across the Bass Strait and the island of Tasmania appears below. Smaller, greener, more forested than the mainland. Its western wilderness one of the last temperate rainforest regions of significant size remaining anywhere on Earth. Hobart sits at the foot of Mount Wellington, the Dolerite mountain that dominates the city's western skyline, its summit often in cloud while the city below is in sunshine. The waterfront of Salamanca Place, its sandstone warehouses built in the 1830s, now housing galleries and restaurants and the Saturday market that fills the cobblestone precinct from dawn, is the most beautiful colonial waterfront in Australia. The Tasmanian wilderness, the southwest wild rivers and ancient stands of Huon pine that live for 3,000 years, the beaches of Fraser Island Peninsula, where the granite of the Hazards Range meets the clear blue of the Tasman Sea, constitutes one of the last genuinely wild places accessible to the ordinary traveler. The 3-day overland track from Cradle Mountain to Lake St. Clair passes through alpine moorland and glacial lakes in a sequence that hikers consistently place among the finest walks available anywhere in the world. Uluru. In the geographic center of Australia, 1,700 kilometers from the nearest ocean in any direction, a single sandstone monolith rises 348 meters above the surrounding desert plain. Uluru, ancient Precambrian rock pushed upward by forces that operated over hundreds of millions of years, its faces in caves and waterholes holding a significance for the Anangu people, the traditional custodians of this land, that no measurement of geology can describe. The Anangu have lived in relationship with Uluru for tens of thousands of years. The rock is not a scenic attraction. It is a living sacred site, every feature woven into the Chukurpa, the Anangu law and belief system that describes the formation of the landscape and the obligations of those who inhabit it. The light on Uluru at dawn moves through a sequence of colors that a painter would be accused of inventing. Gray violet, then rose, then deep terracotta, then a blazing crimson as the angle of light steepens. It happens every morning. It has been happening for hundreds of millions of years. Standing in the desert and watching it is one of the few travel experiences that does not diminish with repetition. Kakadu National Park. In the Northern Territory east of Darwin, Kakadu National Park covers 20,000 square kilometers of floodplains, stone country, and ancient escarpment in one of the most biologically rich and culturally significant landscapes in Australia. The Aboriginal rock art galleries of Nourlangie and Ubir hold some of the most extraordinary ancient human artistic expression on Earth. Images estimated at 20,000 years old and older, still part of a living cultural tradition maintained by the Beninj and Mungai peoples whose country this remains. The Arnhem Land Escarpment runs through the eastern section of the park in walls of sandstone, rising abruptly from the surrounding lowlands, their faces marked by the work of wind and water across hundreds of millions of years, and by the hands of the people who have recorded their world on those surfaces for longer than any other artistic tradition on Earth. The wetlands of the South Alligator River system hold the largest congregation of waterbirds in the Southern Hemisphere. The yellow water billabong at dawn, the water flat and mist-covered, the jabiru stork standing in the shallows, the freshwater crocodile motionless in the morning light, is one of the great wildlife encounters of Northern Australia. Perth. On the southwestern edge of the continent, 3,000 kilometers from the nearest Australian city, Perth sits on the Indian Ocean coast with the particular self-possession of a city that has always been far from everywhere and decided long ago that this was not a problem. It is the most isolated major city in the world. and it has the climate, the coastline, and the easy confidence of somewhere that knows what it has. The Indian Ocean beaches of Perth, Cottesloe, Scarborough, City Beach are among the finest urban beaches in the world. The water is clear, the sand is white, and the afternoon sea breeze called the Fremantle Doctor arrives from the southwest with the reliability of a timetable, breaking the summer heat every day as the beach fills within the hour. Rottnest Island lies 18 kilometers offshore, a low island of limestone and salt lakes and white beaches accessible by ferry, its paths cycled by visitors and shared with the quokkas. The small marsupial, its rounded face and apparent smile producing selfies of a quality that the animal itself seems neither to encourage nor to resist, is the most photographed creature in Western Australia. Fraser Island. Off the southern Queensland coast, the world's largest sand island rises from the sea in dunes that reach 240 meters. The dunes forested with rainforest trees growing directly from the sand, their roots drawing fresh water from the perched lakes that sit in the island's interior in water of a clarity that the surrounding white sand makes more intense. Kakadu is a landscape of such geological improbability that its World Heritage listing understates the case. The perched lakes of Kakadu, Lake Mackenzie, Lake Wabi, Lake Birrabeen, sit in basins formed by organic matter rather than rock, their water filtered through the sand to a clarity that renders the blue of the sky above them with the precision of a mirror. Lake Mackenzie, its white silica sand beach curving around the blue water with the forest at its edge, is one of the most beautiful inland water bodies in Australia. The 75-mile beach on the eastern coast serves as the island's main road. Hard sand used by four-wheel drives moving between the interior tracks. The Maheno shipwreck sits rusting on the beach above the tide line, its hull reduced by a century of salt and wind to a skeleton of steel that the sand has half buried. Gold Coast. South of Brisbane, the Gold Coast extends its 57 kilometers of unbroken sandy beach along the Pacific coast, in the most concentrated resort landscape in Australia. The towers of Surfers' Paradise rise behind the beach, their glass faces catching the morning light. The surf, shaped by the Pacific and managed at the patrolled beaches by lifeguards, is the foundation on which the city was built and the reason the city exists. The beach culture of the Gold Coast is the most recognizable version of Australian beach life that the rest of the world carries. The lifeguard towers, the surf clubs, the morning run on the hard sand at low tide, the afternoon crowd in the Queensland summer heat, the surf at Snapper Rocks at the southern end produces waves that the professional surfing circuit rates among the finest point breaks in the world. The hinterland rises behind the coastal strip in ranges of subtropical rainforest, Lamington National Park and Springbrook in the McPherson Range. They're walking tracks through ancient forests delivering views across the coastal plain and the Pacific that the beach itself does not permit. Kangaroo Island. Off the coast, south of Adelaide, Kangaroo Island is the Australia that the mainland has largely lost. The wildlife in quantities and at a proximity that the pressures of mainland development have made impossible almost everywhere else. Sea lions sleeping on the beach at Seal Bay, their bodies arranged in the communal sprawl of animals that have never been given a reason to be afraid. Koalas in the roadside gums, low enough to observe at eye level. Wallabies in the paddocks at dusk in numbers that make the road require caution. The remarkable rocks at Kirkpatrick Point are granite boulders sculpted by 500 million years of wind and salt spray into shapes of Baroque improbability. Orange and gray forms balanced on a dome of granite above the Southern Ocean, their surfaces hollowed and smoothed into curves that the human eye reads as intentional. The southern coast of Kangaroo Island faces the open Southern Ocean in cliffs and beaches and blowholes that the ocean has been working on since the island separated from the mainland 9,000 years ago. Little Sahara, white sand dunes rising above the Mallee Scrub, is the geological surprise that reminds the visitor that this island is more varied than its most famous wildlife encounters suggest. Adelaide. Adelaide sits at the bottom of the Mount Lofty Ranges in a grid of wide boulevards framed on all sides by parklands. A planned city built with a clear idea of what a civilized place should look like. The Central Market, operating since 1869 beneath its Victorian iron roof, is one of the great food markets of the Southern Hemisphere. The produce stalls, the cheese vendors, the small goods producers, and the bakeries assembled in a covered space that feels both permanent and daily. The Barossa Valley begins an hour north of the city, the most historically significant wine region in Australia. Its old vine Shiraz, planted by German Lutheran settlers in the 1840s from root systems now approaching 2 centuries of age. The deep red soils and warm summers produce Shiraz of a weight and depth that the phrase big red wine does not adequately describe. The color of old garnet, the tannins, the texture of expensive cloth. Walking through the old vine blocks in the autumn, when the leaves have turned and the harvest is finished and the valley has returned to quiet, is to be inside a landscape that has been producing something extraordinary for long enough that the vines themselves have become part of the story. Australian food and culture. Australian food begins with the land and the sea and shortens the distance between the two and the plate as much as possible. The barramundi pulled from the northern rivers and grilled over coals the same evening. The Sydney rock oysters opened and eaten with a squeeze of lemon on the dock. The Moreton Bay bugs halved and grilled in butter with garlic, their flesh sweet and immediate. The coffee culture of Melbourne, the flat white, the expectation of quality at every neighborhood cafe, is built on a standard that has been high long enough that the standard is simply the standard. Indigenous bush tucker, wattle seed, lemon myrtle, Kakadu plum is the oldest cuisine on the continent. 65,000 years of knowledge now finally arriving on the plates of the world. Australia is not just a country you visit. It is a country that changes your sense of what the words big and ancient and beautiful actually mean. The reef below the surface in the Coral Sea, the silence of the desert at Uluru as the dawn light crosses the rock, the rainforest of the Daintree pressing to the water, where the oldest forest on Earth meets the oldest reef. The sea lion on Kangaroo Island, looking at you with the complete absence of fear that an animal feels when it has never needed it. From the surf beaches of the Gold Coast to the wilderness of Tasmania, from the laneways of Melbourne to the rock art of Kakadu, 20,000 years old on the stone, Every place in this vast and extraordinary country gives you something that only it can give. Australia reminds us that the world is bigger and older and more beautiful than we remember. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the world is full of wonders and your next adventure is already waiting to begin.